Hello and welcome to Two Girls in a Pot. I'm Sharon.
I'm Christy.
So happy to have you as always. We're having a bit of an Arctic storm here.
Blast.
Yuck. That's what we call it, yuck.
Yeah.
13
13 degrees high. That is not my thing.
No. I always wonder, what are we doing living in Colorado? And then the fact that it is, to me, one of the most beautiful states. But this weather, it's not my thing.
Winter's not our favorite. Yeah, really anywhere but here.
So we decided, we're still going to do some recording, but we're just going to do it from home.
Yeah.
So what that means for you guys there is, remember, Tala, the dog, does whatever she wants to do during these things. And she just misbehaves if she wants. I don't know.
Our little mascot.
I don't think she calls it misbehavior, but but one of the things is we've been talking a lot about is how to be your authentic self. Everything we do, because even our coaching business, mindset coaching, is about how do we change a thought pattern? How do we change how we're seeing and perceiving in order to be that individual we want to be? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And not be totally encumbered with everything going on around us.
Which there's a lot going on around us. We have all sorts of natural things that go on in just business and circumstances that are really beyond our control.
Yes.
But there are so many things that can really get in the way of us being successful. And the biggest one is fear.
Mm-hmm.
It is fear. And, when we're talking about fear, we have to look at what is it preventing us from doing, from achieving, from being. Mm-hmm. Those are the things. There is so much going on, and there is so much that people don't realize that thought alone is preventing them from reaching those heights that they could possibly reach personally, professionally, relationship, just straight across the board.
Mm-hmm. And while we think of fear as a protection thing, and it can be, we have to realize that in our society and that there are a lot of people that gain from the fear that we have.
And what's sad is a majority of people gain from somebody else's fear. If y'all have not watched Fluffy, you got to watch Fluffy. Gabriel Iglesias, he is so funny. He's just really fun. But we were watching his special in Miami, and one of the things he was talking about is that his home got broken into. So now he's afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And rightly so. So you would think, if somebody's afraid, our job is to help them be less afraid, but in a healthy way. So he goes into a store to buy a gun. He's never owned a gun. He doesn't know anything about guns. So talking to the guy, and he says, "I'll take the 22." And the guy goes, "The tutu? What's the tutu?" So that one right there, that tutu right there. He goes, "Oh, you mean a 22? He goes, "Well, I ain't gonna do nothing." So he goes on to tell him about how that 22 doesn't do anything. You got to get this bigger bullet or this better bullet. That's going to really do something. Well, then he goes, "Well, that's not going to do anything." And then he starts talking to you about all this stuff. He plays on Fluffy's fear.
Right.
So Fluffy walks out with 4 pistols and 4 rifles. But guess what? It didn't take away the fear. Now all he does is have this stuff that really probably doesn't even resonate with him in the same way. So once again, who's profiting off of your fear?
Yeah. And that is happening quite often.
Yes, we have fear, and then people profit. Whenever you're seeing that, I always tell people, stop and say, okay, if somebody's talking to me and my fear is getting worse as they're talking to me, what are they selling me? What are they trying to gain from me?
Mm-hmm.
And it's with everything. We are big Golden Girl fans. We're in love, and they're funny. But in one of the episodes, they get broken into as well.
Mm-hmm.
Dorothy, she's from New York. Yeah, that happens. Just let's go to bed now, kind of thing. Rose, growing up in St. Olaf, where crime is probably zero, has a very different reaction. She's very afraid. So they decided to put in an alarm system. The guy comes in and he starts feeding on their fear. Well, that system's gonna get an annoying sound and the neighbors are gonna ignore, so basically you'll be dead by the time anybody gets to you.
Yeah.
And 1 in 4 of you is gonna die. And here's Rose. One of us is gonna die, because there's 4 of them. She knew that, yeah, she can do math. But it built on this fear. And it was irrational fear. And the other women knew it was irrational fear, but they didn't know how to help her not have the irrational fear.
Mhm.
So she comes home one day with her knitting stuff and pulls everything out. She bought a gun. And they go, you don't know the first thing about a gun. Well, of course she doesn't. So what does she do?
Has a little mishap. So Blanche comes in the night with her date
Lester.
and scares Rose because the alarm's going off, and she comes in there with the gun and shoots. Thankfully doesn't shoot Lester.
But shot Blanche's favorite vase.
Yes.
And even in that, it still did not take away her irrational fear.
Mhm.
The thing that took away her irrational fear is when she thought she was being followed and she realized she could take care of herself.
Yeah.
She started believing that something exterior to her was going to take care of her fear. Fear is interior to us because we don't all fear. Well, we all of us fear. There's many things that we all fear together, but not always. Some people fear snakes. Some people, they're like, oh, come here, little snakey. That's not me. I don't know if that's a friend or foe. You know?
Yeah. But you also
What's your biggest? What's one of your bigger fears?
spiders. Yeah, yeah. No, creepy crawlies.
And you know what she told me? I don't care if it's an irrational fear.
It's one I'll keep.
But nobody's trying to make money off of her. No.
Right.
You know, I just don't want to have to sleep with one eye open sometimes where we go to make sure there's no bugs. But it's
Yeah.
irrational. And but we don't view it as irrational because fear is it feels very real to us.
Yeah. And we have to remember that even, I mean, you see a lot of things that are fear-based, even in our news and things like that. But you know, those catastrophic things that get people's attention and get them revved up is the thing that sells. So, you know, I think that we see a lot of that, and a lot of times we just go into that fear-based thing, and we don't realize how much it impacts our lives, and how we're living from that space really prohibits us from thriving the way that we should.
As you said, if I'm living in a state of fear, everything stops. Whether we realize it or not, everything stops because I'm afraid. People are afraid of success. People are afraid of that word I don't use, failure. People are so afraid of that word that they won't do.
Yeah.
I'd rather not do than be viewed in the eyes of others or myself as a failure, which once again, failure is some stupid made up word. We don't fail, we practice.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, how many people are not successful for that very reason? And I think, you know, we're kind of guilty of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think everybody is, especially because we sit in judgment of ourselves a lot of the time. So we get in our own way in that way. We're fearful, even if we are successful with something, then how do we handle that? You know, and how do we manage the things that we have to take care of once we reach that goal?
And, you know, we don't even know where fear necessarily comes from oftentimes because we don't pay attention. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we're reading a book right now. What's the title?
The Secrets of the Millionaire Mind.
And so in there, there's a story in there. And so he's doing a workshop. This woman comes, she's a nurse, successful nurse. It's not like she's not making money, but she didn't have any money. Well, they decide, you know, as they're talking, he goes, what is like a memory? And then she remembers when she was 11 years old, they're at a Chinese restaurant. The parents get into a fight about what?
Finances.
Like a bad fight. I mean, so bad that dad is angry. He stands up, he's yelling in the middle of a Chinese restaurant.
Raging.
raging.
turning red, eventually blue, and falls to the floor, having a heart attack. So she had learned CPR.
Because she was a swimmer.
Yeah. So she goes to help the dad, and he ends up passing. So talk about financial trauma. We've had a past episode on that. Something that really stuck with her. Here she is,
All these years
experiencing this.
later.
Yeah. And having seen her parents, this was all about money. And then he has a heart attack and dies.
So then think about the association she makes. Dad died because of money. Okay. So now, whether she realizes or not, subconsciously, she has a fear of money or of having more money. So she makes money, she spends it, and she doesn't keep money because now this irrational fear is money killed my dad, probably. So it's how you make these connections, or arguing about money. And
well, and because it becomes a subconscious thing.
oh,
So it's not your thinking mind because that just sounds irrational to really believe that. But somehow that gets integrated into the body, and there becomes that physiological response.
And even more in that subconscious, she becomes a nurse, not because she wants to become a nurse, but she becomes a nurse because then it becomes saving her father. Okay. So this is how our subconscious works. And this is how we tie things in together that don't make any sense.
Yeah.
So in order for her to understand that, she first had to realize this is an irrational fear. This is why I am the way I am, is because of these events. So fear comes from even a traumatic event. In this case, that is pretty traumatic. Who would want to be there and trying to save your parent and they die in your arms?
Yeah.
Of course, that's going to be traumatic. But not understanding that we don't pay attention to those things, they start to play out in our mind. They start to play out in our actions, in our mind, in how we then navigate the world without any awareness to it. And fear often is in the subconscious of us. It is what keeps us stuck. And we've talked about this even as we've been working on business and things like that, because you've identified some of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even in the thought of how do we make a business a success, or how to make more or anything like that, then you got to know how to manage that, and how do you maintain it. There's things that go into that. So it can feel like an overwhelming responsibility, even though it's a part of your goal to be successful in that business or whatever it is. But you still have to wrap your mind around, how do I manage this once I reach that level?
Well, and I think once again, you said it, it's like we have a fear of success, and then people have a fear of this idea of failure.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're successful, that means more responsibility. That means more, I don't know what you thought meant, but.
Well, I mean, it's easy to get in that cycle of thinking, and it becomes a fear thing, which leads to a procrastination and a not doing. And so you just are staying stuck. And it's all based on these fears that may or may not be rational. I mean, really, because you're able to learn things and do things.
And the thing is that they're not necessarily rational to begin with, but we will create the rational behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've done this, even if there's something fearful, you might say, oh, well, that doesn't even make any sense. No. And you try talking yourself out of it, but then there's that other piece that says, I don't care what you're talking about. This is scary.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about this the other day because I was actually talking to one of my clients, and we were talking about, when the things you learn to be afraid of when you're little, how parents use things like the coco man or this, that, or the other. Well, in the Latin culture, one of the things they talk about is that if you got to keep your feet covered. Where this comes from, I don't know. And I'm going to have to, but if you don't keep your feet covered, then the people who passed on the ghost come and pull at your toes. So, and he goes, I know that's not rational. He goes, but you know what, Sharon, I still don't sleep with my feet on the they have to be
Blanket.
covered.
Yeah.
And I said, you're a grown man. He goes, yeah. He goes, how long did it take you to sleep with your feet uncovered? I said, we're not talking about me. It's all about you. Let's talk about you. But it's interesting, those little things. I don't think parents really tell you that to scare you, or probably my siblings, you know how they are.
Some
Tell you all sorts
parents,
of crap.
some parents maybe.
But no, seriously. And I didn't hear this growing up, but I have heard it from friends, from clients and stuff, that when they were little, they were told that if you misbehaved, you were holding the hand of the devil. Did you hear that?
No,
What were some that you heard that became fear-based?
that became fear-based. I don't.
You have some about heat.
Oh yeah, that's true. Because we were always being told about hanging over the flames of hell. So, it became this thing whenever I was around something that was super, super hot, even putting something in the oven. It just, that heat coming at me would just like have some kind of effect. And
I'm going to hell.
it really impacted me.
I did not know that until one day I'm opening the oven and she's standing next to me and I'm watching her and she's having a physiological response to this. And I'm there like, what are you doing? And then that's when she told me, and I go, they would tell you that as a child? Who tells their children that? And I get it. It's people trying to make sure that kids are behaving or whatever. But I don't think they understand when they use that type of terminology, especially in about a deity or things like that, just how powerful that can be.
Well, and I really believe strongly that as people age too, a lot of times that turns them away from their faith. So,
The other one that you had, you would get up and look for your parents.
mhm. Yeah, because I was always being told about rapture, a second coming and, being left behind or those things. So I I would get up in the middle of the night and look for my parents, make sure they were still there because I was fearful of that. I'd have a nightmare, something about hell, and so then I'd wake up and go looking for them.
And once again, it's even you fast forward. I mean, I don't think you have that one, but I do know that one about hanging over the flames of hell. But then how much, and you're right, I don't know how many people realize it might turn them away from their faith because fear, it's either to bring something in or it's to drive something away.
But typically, what I find is that when it's something that is based in fear, it does not have a lasting thing. So the thing that they hope to accomplish by instilling that fear is not a sustainable thing. It just doesn't. It doesn't have the same effect over time.
And I think that when we are talking about any of those things, and these are just things, you can remember from your childhood of, you don't do that, and we've talked before about people having fear of having money and that success and how it keeps us stuck. But people have fear of relationships. It's like, oh my God, this was how my parents' relationship was. This is why I don't trust relationship. Once again, we get fearful of these things that we don't understand. We don't put into context of what is going on with those individuals.
Right.
And so therefore, what we do is we transfer it to everything. And then we think that this is happening everywhere, whatever, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are kind of the things. I mean, it's even like people who get lost once, then they don't want to. As a therapist, I have found that fear it's an amazing thing because a fear turns into a phobia, turns into huge anxiety. When we look at people with OCD, the compulsive thought is if I don't do this, then something bad's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So they do their things in order to keep bad away. Not understanding that all it's doing is keeping them very stuck.
Right.
And it's a fear-based thing. In order to identify what that fear is, we have to talk about it. So even like, because I was curious as to why opening the oven, you had that physiological reaction. Then we started the conversation and then you were there like, oh, it's because, and then you don't have that as much now at all.
No.
Yeah.
No, and I think that that's the thing is once you identify where these fears come from, it's so much empowering just to realize that because it takes the power out of what it is that you're afraid of. When you do talk about it, when you're able to identify where it comes from and how it's not based in reality, it helps you so much.
And even, and we talked about that too. When you are doing it, ask yourself if somebody is telling you information and it's creating a fear in you, what are they getting from it? If you ever listen to car commercials, ours has the highest safety rating. Well, if it has the highest safety rating, then guess what? When you get in a car accident, you don't have to worry. But you better be afraid if you don't take my car because this car doesn't. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
There's all these little things that are put in advertisement as a way of creating fear in order for people to buy a product.
And sometimes it's not so blatant. I mean, you have to do a little digging to understand why someone is
Doing
using
what they're doing.
Yeah, using this as a fear. What is it that they are trying to gain?
This is nothing against any company, anything. We're not about that. But one of the things that we notice is if people do stuff in the news about fear of increasing crime, in threats from here, threats from that, there's this drive, and then who's profiting? Gun sales skyrocket because of fear. Because the people who like guns and have guns already have guns. It's the people who don't have guns, like Fluffy, who then go buy guns. So the person profiting is the gun, the store, the gun manufacturer, blah, blah, blah. It's like this whole thing. Instead of saying, you know what, I understand, you start off with one gun, you get comfortable with it, whatever, but that's not what it is. We use fear to drive sales. We use fear to drive all sorts of things, either to something or away from something. But all fear, regardless if the external thing is away from something or to something, all fear internally for you is affecting you internally and keeping you stuck.
Yeah.
It's not driving you to success. It can drive you from success, but it can also not drive you not to. Do you see what I mean? That's all an internal thing.
It is not a positive motivator.
It isn't. And like a lot of these coaches I've seen in the past, and when I've worked in schools, and if the coach was used fear, it didn't bring out, those teams were not necessarily the ones that were winning. It's the ones that were promoting the positivity of who you are as a team member, all of those kind of things. So fear works for some, but it doesn't work for a majority of people.
No, and it usually just makes people feel bad about themselves, like they're not enough.
Exactly. But you had talked about that, and having that awareness to the fear. And the way that you have the awareness is, once again, I think it's asking that first question of who's profiting from my fear? Okay. If it's something more internal, the question becomes, what am I afraid of? What am I truly afraid of?
And what is it rooted in? Where does the thought come from? Where does the fear, what is it based in? Because once you identify that, I think that it, like I said, it takes away the power of that. When you realize maybe it's not what I think it is. Maybe it's not as so serious, or it's just what I've been told.
And I think that we don't spend enough time asking those questions. Do you know what I mean? I know that is something that you really have to. We were just having that conversation. You said you had a feeling. And remember, anxiety is usually around fear. They go hand in hand.
And you feel it in the gut before you
Okay.
know it in the brain. Because the mind doesn't know maybe what's happening in the gut that's telling you, you feel those butterflies or you feel that angst and you feel it in your gut. And the mind doesn't know what's happening. I mean, that happened to me this morning. I had woke up and I was like, what is that feeling I'm feeling in my gut? And, I just sat with it and thought it through. And I thought, well, okay, there's quite a few things on my to-do list. Maybe I just am feeling a bit behind with some of that. And I just need to realize, though, it's one task at a time, everything will get done. So giving myself the grace to know that not everything has to be done at once. And just sitting with that really helped me to overcome that feeling.
But you also said that even though you were doing that, what else was going on? You said there was more other thoughts like trying to not sabotage, but interfere, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I had just a lot of things coming into my mind. So I was just trying to, like I say, sit with that and distinguish what it was. What was the creating the feeling? It wasn't one specific thing. I think it was just all of it.
And I think, that's the thing, we get inundated with a lot of thought. And because it's so much thought, our anxiety goes up, our fear of not being able to accomplish anything. And in doing so, it's like nothing gets done.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of, I mean, we've talked a lot about clearing your space in that. And a lot of times, sometimes you feel completely overwhelmed and you find that it's because you're surrounded by a bunch of stuff. You don't know where to start. You just have anxiety about it. And so that happens too.
I always go back to your brother when we were moving them and, we're all packing away and I'm thinking, why haven't we seen him for a hot minute? And I go in the room and he is literally standing in the middle of the room, just going in circles.
He was like the computer on buffer. What do I
Yes.
do first? I don't know where to start.
I'm serious. And I walk in and go, what are you doing? He goes, there's too much. I don't know. And you could tell he was having this anxiety and this fear of not knowing I'm not going to get it done, or I'm going to get in trouble. I mean, all of these thoughts were going on in his head. And I'm looking at him and I go, just stop for a minute. First, stop spinning around. I said, okay, we're going to do this. So I broke every task down for him. Then he was able to do it. But no, he was just in there, that deer in the headlight look, spinning around in a circle. Like you said, that little buffer going round and around.
I think that happens a lot when someone's moving.
Oh, good.
You just got to get one box and start in one corner. Just do that, because especially as you get towards the end, it reminds me of cleaning out the junk drawer. The junk drawer has miscellaneous everything. And you're like, what do I do with it? That's why it ended up here. A collection of stuff. So it's like, it seems overwhelming to actually have to find a place for it all.
You know what's interesting too is when you're doing that and you're talking about getting rid of stuff, how many people are afraid of well, what if I need it?
Yeah.
What if somebody else needs it? Who cares that I have 5 of them? No, there is actually this fear of getting rid of things. And it's like, we've gone through that where they're like, no. And I tell people, our rule is if we haven't used it in a year or 6 months, it's not that important. Get rid of it. But do you know, before that, do you know how many moves we've had? And we carried the same crap from one place to the other. We bought this house and they're like, we gotta stop carrying crap around. And we went and just gave away, donated so much stuff because we were done moving things from one place to the other. But people get fearful of not having things.
Yeah.
So therefore they will have multiple things, which then leads to more anxiety because now they have clutter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this vicious cycle that we're always caught up in.
Yeah. We had even heard a story of someone that had multiple storage units and ended up, they couldn't even afford housing really to this point because they had so many storage units of stuff that they weren't using but could not part with.
They were afraid of getting rid of something that they might need. But then when you even start talking to people about that, once again, it's something generationally that is happening with them. They're holding on to those ideas. And you look at generations. So if you look at like the baby boomers, remember the generation before that, their parents were part of the Depression era. So they had a very different way of looking at things because of the economy and their fear.
Mm-hmm.
When we had the great crash, the stock market crash at that time, people were committing suicide because they were fearful that they had lost everything. Well, losing your life is everything. Losing money is nothing because you can always make more money. But it was the fear of the repercussions of losing money.
Yeah.
That's how powerful fear is.
Right.
And how irrational it is.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
And realizing it does come a lot of times from those fears from how you were raised in that because of they were raised in those times. And so it is passed on. And sometimes you have to be able to identify those things.
And I think sometimes things are done in fun too, like your siblings tell you all sorts of crap growing up, you know? And the thing is that sometimes they think it's in, once again, you're talking to the kid about the Coco Man. I don't know what we call, and the Llorona. Oh, that's a big one. The Llorona.
The boogeyman.
Yeah. Forget the boogeyman. When everybody was more afraid of the Llorona, she took kids. And she cried. She cried for her kids she killed, and then she wanted other kids. I don't know. I'm telling you, you grow up with that stuff, and then you hear those sounds like, oh, here comes a Llorona. Or your siblings would scare you to do things. They wanted something from you. If you don't do that, the Llorona is going to come get you. So here you are going and doing their chores and stuff because the Llorona is going to come and get you. Well, then you have to stop and be rational. Well, wait a minute. If she's going to come and get me, she's going to come and get you. These are the things we don't do because fear does not allow rational thought.
Right.
It doesn't allow rational thought. That's why you have to do what Christy said. You have to stop and sit with it and ask yourself. And we talked about that. You go through this checklist. Well, I don't have stress about this. No, work is going good. You start doing this little checklist, but the feeling's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes you just sit with the feeling and you acknowledge that, okay, yeah, something's going on. I don't know what it is. And then you can continue to process, as you said, sometimes it's more of that generational historical thing that's going on.
Yeah.
But fear keeps us from doing that unless we do something consciously. We have to consciously say, I'm going to slow everything down. I'm going to sit with this for a minute. And I'm going to ask myself, where is this coming from? Why do I have it? And more importantly is, what is it keeping me from? Why am I using it? Because sometimes we use fear, as you said, sometimes because we're afraid of success.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm afraid of it and I use it, then I don't have those responsibilities. And we've talked about that. You start creating in your head stuff that's not even real.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole thing about fear. Fear, most of the time, is stuff that we create in our head that is not real.
No, it just keeps us from taking action. And I think we have to remember that our inner world creates our outer world. Instead of letting the outer world create all this stuff within us.
And when I talk, they'll say, oh my God, about crime, this, that, and the other. And I was telling my client, and I said, listen, what I want you to do is I want you to go look at local news. Because he would watch the news all the time, and then he would get all anxious. And I asked him, why are you getting anxious? Why are you so fearful? And he already has 10 cameras. I'll go get 7 more. Let's have 17 cameras. I mean, they're like, how many cameras do you have to feel safe?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing is that not understanding the camera was already supposed to make him safe. But then what happens is if you're watching the news and they're talking about, oh, this break-in, this carjacking, this, that, the other, okay? Then what happens is it's feeding that fear on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
But I told him, I said, I want you to go watch the news. And I said, we're going to talk next week. And I said, we're going to talk about the stories in the news. And he did. And he comes back and he goes, He goes, I think I know what you're going to tell me. And I go, oh, that it's a repeat. Did that this morning with her. I said, oh, look, here's our news for the day. This happened. They changed the wording. It's the same exact story. They changed the wording. But then now you think, oh my God, carjacking on, I don't know, we'll pick a street here, Cheltenham. That's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. And then, oh, man gets hot car hijacked in Colorado Springs at this location, same carjacking, different heading. This is that fear-based thing because fear sells.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't
and
that
usually,
sad?
Yeah, usually people don't tie it together that it's one thing. They see a bunch of things happening. It sounds like there is a whole
slew of things going
string
on.
of things that, yeah. So then it feels overwhelming.
And that's the thing. But our fear doesn't allow us to stop and look at those things. But when people started talking to me about our crime rates, all this about, and they're like, well, where have I been? I got to go investigate because I don't know what you're talking about. And then once again, that's what I realized. It was the same stories.
Mhm.
I don't care if it's on national news. You go and you see the same story. And I love these people who channel surf news, headline news, same story, different version. So now they think this is multiple. It's not. It's same thing, different headings, different perceptions of the same exact thing.
Yeah.
But fear sells. Scaring people sells. Why do you think those scary movies do so good? And I think that's a sad state of affairs. I really do. I think it's sad. The stuff that I look at is it's about giving, it's about taking care of others, it's about helping, it's about positivity, those kind of things. Because if we don't, we get caught up in it. And then once again, like you said, internal.
Mm-hmm. Our inner world creates our outer world.
But when we start and and I'm just using if we're looking at the news and stuff like that, now the external world is creating my internal world.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, we feel out of control.
Right.
Nobody likes to feel out of control. So in order to change that, and that's what the whole premise of what we do in our coaching and with this, as mindset coaches, we are about changing the way you are perceiving and doing things if it is not helping to excel you to that next level of success, whatever your idea of success is.
Yeah.
Everybody's is different. Some people want a house, some people want to go live out in the middle of nowhere or off the grid or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's your goal.
Mm-hmm.
But too much of the time, once again, we're listening to that external that's creating our internal world. How many generations have you heard, oh, our world's going to hell in a handbasket? I'm not even sure what that means.
But they've said it for generations. So there you go.
Oh, this new generation, they're going to ruin the world. I mean, we hear it's the same stuff said every generation. I always loved the music industry. When Elvis came out and how dare he shake his pelvis? What is wrong with him? He's sexualizing everything. It's all about sex now.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that true?
Fast forward.
Could you imagine the people who said that seen our videos today of some of our performers? Good Lord, they would think that we had just gone to hell in a handbasket.
Sure. It says, look, our prophecy was fulfilled.
They ain't wearing no clothes.
Yeah.
They're gyrating. This is the thing. It's a fear-based thing once again. The number one thing that we are afraid of is change because it is the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
But people, let me tell you something. Everything you've ever done is unknown.
And change is inevitable.
Exactly.
It's all the time.
Yes. We don't sit there and get to stop the world where we want it. We don't get to stop our day where we want it. It's going to continue to happen. So that's that irrational thing of people were afraid of the unknown. From the moment we're born, everything is unknown. We are in a learning process every day.
And it's about our responses to these things.
Exactly. And how do you choose to respond to them?
Yeah.
But I get it. I think it's early on. And, we once again look historically, where did this fear of the unknown come from? Death. People fear death.
Yeah.
But it's not death that they fear. It is the unknown. What happens after death?
Yeah.
That's what it is. And so when we sit there and we talk about we fear the unknown, that's the deep root of that fear. Is I don't know what happens when I die. Well, guess what? You don't have to. All you have to know is what are you going to do in the moment you have?
Mm-hmm.
Me being afraid of what's going to happen after death means I'm not living.
Right, exactly. I just read a meme earlier. I think it was Charlie Brown.
That's so great.
I know, where he says about we only live once, and Snoopy tells him, no, we only die once, we live every day.
Oh my God. And that is so true. But we are so caught up in this place of fear that we're not living.
Yeah.
We're so afraid of, people as they get older, oh my God, I'm getting closer to death. We don't know that. We have these ideas. People have ideas, when it comes to death, well, it's going to do this chronological thing. Grandparents die first, parents, children, grandchildren. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
But it is that fear that keeps us stuck. But my thing is that if you're having fear, talk to somebody, because talking to that person then starts this dialogue, which brings that into an awareness. And once something is in our awareness, we can change it.
We can set it free.
Very much so. But we're not doing that. We're listening and we're buying and we're feeding fear and filling somebody's pockets.
And not filling our own sometimes, because, even if it's a business endeavor or something like that, you're keeping yourself from receiving your gifts. When you're able to provide a service to somebody or a product to somebody that betters their life.
It's funny because when you work with clients and stuff like that, and in our coaching, what you'll notice is that people will either undersell themselves or oversell themselves because they're afraid of losing customers or whatever, instead of just simply charging what your value is. If you charge what your value is and you promote you or your product and the value of it, and you believe in that, and it resonates, then people are going to buy it. They're not going to sit there and say, oh, I think that's too much. And if they do, it's like, oh, I'm sorry. There's some other people who can maybe help you better. I don't know.
But you have to fully believe in your product or your service.
Yes.
Whatever that is, for it to have the effect that you want.
And I think when you're doing that, when you're in business, everybody out here is the audience and is the market. And so you want people to like your product. So you get fearful of, oh, if I do this, they might not like it. If I do this, they might not like it. So I think a lot of people are constantly moving around trying to make sure it's not about everybody liking your product. It's about the people who resonate with it will come to your product. You're not trying to sell to the whole world. You know how many billions of people are in the world? I mean, that would be lovely, but that ain't going to happen. And that's the beauty of it, is find what you do and really build on it and remove the fear, that external fear of if somebody's going to like or not like it. One of the things is that our thing has always been with our podcast, with our businesses, we don't promote hate. We don't promote ugly. And I had somebody tell me this the other day, if on your podcast you did more controversial things, if you said these outlandish things, people are really going to flock to it and you're going to have this great audience. But that doesn't resonate with us.
It's not the goal to stir up the negative in people and bring out the ugly. It wasn't the determination that we had when creating it.
But there are some out there. There are some controversial things out there, and that's what they thrive on. And, when people say things that are outlandish or do stuff like that, if that's how you have to be relevant, that's fine. But I will not be feared, your podcast, but I don't care what somebody thinks about it, doesn't think about it. It's got to resonate with us. And you can't use other people's opinions to put a fear in you about not being successful or those kind of things and then change who you are. You just can't do that, because at the end of the day, we would not be okay with who we are.
Right.
I kind of have to live with me. I have to live with you too, but you know what I mean. So those are the things we're talking about. Take the time, sit with the fear, ask yourself who's gaining from my fear, And believe it or not, people, the biggest place this happens is in relationships. So we're going to finish this episode talking about relationships. People use fear to keep people in relationships. They manipulate and use fear. And I don't know how many times I've heard, if you're not with me, nobody's going to want you. Nobody is going to want you in their life. Nobody's going to love you. They're using fear. Now, if I leave you, then I'm fearful I'm going to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're not going to have the success with somebody else. All of these things in our personal relationships, it happens even more frequently that people use fear. Well, if you leave me, you're not going to get anything. You're going to be poor. You're going to be, and we already know how people feel about being poor. They fear that too. So it plays on all of these fears. And I don't think, even in that, once again, who's gaining from this?
Yeah.
Who's driving the fear? If that person's driving the fear, oftentimes it's because they're afraid of the change or of being alone. So in order to get rid of that fear, to keep you, they're going to use these kind of statements with you.
Exactly. I think when we live from a state of fear, it is very hard to be whole.
Oh God, yeah. What a perfect way to end. Because that's a really good statement. It really is about our wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
But remember, it's take that time, sit with it, become aware of it, and then talk about it with somebody.
So you can release it.
Yes, then it's gone. Then you go on to the next fear. No.
It's a daily practice.
As we always say, practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
So as always, you can find us
on twogirlsinapod.com. Every time there's a new episode released, you will receive an email if you subscribe to the website. We appreciate it. Any likes or comments that you give us. Also, you can find us Adventures of Two Girls in a Pod Life's Journey on YouTube. We have a few different things on there. And then also you can find us on social media, Instagram and Facebook. So follow, like, subscribe. We appreciate it.
All of those things are so important. You know what I mean? And it's kind of sad in a way because, once again, algorithm is, I'm getting to the place where oh God, don't say algorithm again. Don't say algorithm. But I get it. And this is what we do. So we appreciate everybody who does that and the likes and the comments and the follows and the engaging with us is super important. And we're always grateful for that. Going to give a real quick shout out to Miss June Medina. And the reason why is because she does it and then we talk and she talks. We're now having these conversations and we really appreciate it. And we really appreciate her sharing with other people what we do and the positivity. And we are really about that positivity. And I can't be positive if I'm in a place of fear. They butt heads, and usually, believe it or not, fear kind of overrides it.
Mm-hmm.
So, once again, we appreciate it. We thank you. And, if you're in these places that is having this really cold weather, stay in, stay warm, read a good book, play a game, sit and think, why am I afraid? Could be a time of contemplation. Anyway, once again, thank you so much. And we will be back next week. And thank you. And once again, stay warm.
Thank you.